Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, the EFF has raised a red flag over the new version of AOL Instant Messenger. We'll tell you the details on how it logs your conversation and preloads links. Plus, a lot of you have asked, and now we're going to answer, how does NGINX stack up to Apache, and which is the right tool for the job? All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is our Systems Network and Administration podcast. This is episode 39. It's the first episode of 2012. We recorded it live on January 5th for release on January 6th, 2012. That's a Friday. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by ScaleEngine.com, which is awesome. My name is Chris, and joining me every single week is the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan!
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. 39
episodes. You know what? For some reason,
that's 39 episodes in a row.
I know. We didn't even break for the holidays. That's that's like you and the Faux Show are like the two shows on the network that didn't break for the holidays. And that's just because the Faux Show is hosted by my wife, and she'd kill me, so I didn't have a choice. And then, you know, I'm all for it too, though. Really, I'm a hardcore guy, so I'll keep going too. Oh, you know what, Alan? I just remembered. Remember I said on the live stream I had a few pieces of business I wanted to cover at the top of the show?
Yes.
We got a big show. We got a lot of stuff we're going to get into today. I just want to cover 3 quick points before we go on. Number 1 is tomorrow, if you're watching this right on Friday when it comes out, Saturday, I will be releasing my 5th episode of the rebooted In-Depth Look series. If you haven't seen those yet, you can go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com and watch one of those. So far, since I've rebooted it, I've covered an episode that tells you how to have proper password hygiene, and I've also given a couple episodes behind-the-scenes tours here at Jupiter Broadcasting, and also my most recent one is on Star Wars: The Republic. However, on Saturday, I will be releasing an episode on a open source application called Sickbeard, and I think some of you cord cutters might be interested in catching that. So be sure to get that. That's number 1. I just want to tell you guys about the new show. Number 2 is TechSNAP, and all of the shows are looking for advertising. The 2012 year is here, and we want to get running on all of the projects that we want to accomplish, and we have investments we want to make in our equipment, so we're seeking additional advertisers. If you would like to get in front of our incredible audience and get more details from us, go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/advertise, and, you know, maybe we could be a perfect fit for you. And one last little bit of business is the Jupiter Signal is back, and we'll have a spot in the show notes where you can sign up for the Signal, or you can go over to bit.ly/Jupiter Signal. That's Jupiter Broadcasting's monthly newsletter, and we're going to tell you things in there like some new shows we have in the works, some behind-the-scenes details, all kinds of stuff. In fact, Alan, you throw in quite a bit with that newsletter too. At least on the last one you did, and I'm sure Ange will be, Alan, we're going to send off the next one in a week, and I need some polish on this. So I'm sure she'll be talking to you soon.
Glad to help.
All right. So we have got a big show. Do you want to jump into our first news story?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is sort of a follow-up to a story that we ran last week where things were kind of in the early stages. Now, some pretty significant details have come out. Now, and I'll let you take it from here.
Okay. So the Stratfor database, which we saw, was they were hacked into over the Christmas time span there. But originally, we got a couple of leaks of, a couple thousand accounts at a time, but then came basically the whole database, which was over 860,000 accounts. So near enough as makes no difference to 1 million accounts.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, not hashed properly, right? Just straight MD5, no cryptographic hashes at all.
Which we've talked about. MD5 is basically like nothing.
Yeah. And so because of that, researchers at a website called thetechherald.com were able to crack about 80,000 of those passwords in under 5 hours.
Wow.
Just with some simple dictionaries.
Let me guess. What they found...
With one machine.
I'm going to be a little disappointed in what they found, aren't I?
Oh, yes. So they tried a couple different lists, some basic words, numbers, and then they're like, well, probably the best way to get the best possible rate of simple passwords that they could crack was to take the databases of previously hacked websites and what passwords showed up there. So they took the databases from Gawker, Hotmail, Singles.org, MySpace, Facebook, all the places that we've seen get hacked before,
Sure.
and have their password databases exposed. And people, spent lots of time hacking those and see what are the most popular passwords, right? Like last week's show, we had that list of passwords from that Chinese developer network site.
Right. And some
so
of them were just super basic.
Yeah, and so basically they took that list and plowed it against the 860,000 and came back with lots and lots of passwords.
Jeez Louise.
And of course, these are tied to email accounts, right? And being as if you're the type of person that uses 123456 as your password, how much you want to bet the password for your email is 123456?
Right. I mean, I know that's why I made, when I rebooted that In-Depth Look series I just mentioned,
Yes.
I made the first episode out of the gate, an episode about how to have unique passwords for every website you visit. And in that episode, I say it's just as important as having a great firewall on a network or, malware protection and things like that.
It's really the most important thing.
I agree, yeah. I agree because there's all of these services now that can be completely tampered with, and there'll be no indication to you that it's happening.
Yep. Yeah, because if the people from that broke into this Stratfor website hadn't defaced the website as well, they could have gotten away without anybody noticing that they stole this list.
Right.
And they could have had a much more successful spear phishing attack if that was their goal, but it wasn't.
So do you have any examples?
Yeah, so they have some of the horribly insecure passwords we saw were obviously 123456.
Yeah, of course.
1111111111 8 times. QWERTY, Robert, James, and other first names. 1987, 1987, and a bunch of other horrible ones. We're seeing many, many times, right? Not just once.
Right.
So obviously Stratfor and its customers should have been using far more secure passwords.
Oh, yeah.
Part of this is that Stratfor should have enforced a basic password policy, preventing people from having really short passwords. From the Google cache of their site, it seems that they recommended you use at least 6 characters in your password. It's much better if you use at least 9.
Yeah.
But they didn't have any requirements at all. Some people were using single character passwords.
So they just kind of had like a limp-wristed, we recommend you do this kind of thing.
Yeah. But at least almost every site out there won't let you use a 1-character password.
Right.
And these guys did.
Incredible.
No validation of any kind.
And it makes you wonder if it was because of some sort of back-end limitation. Like maybe they're using some sort of old proprietary software system.
Well, they're doing an MD5 hash, so it doesn't matter what the password is or how long the password is. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Because when in terms of how it's stored, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because
I always get annoyed by the fact that my bank limits the length of my password to 12 characters. And it's like, well, if they did hashing, then it wouldn't matter how long my password was. It would always come out to the same length in their database.
Right.
But yeah, so they should have better basic password policies, which probably be at least 8 or 9 characters, and maybe not just all alpha, right? You should have to have a number or something. But the worst part is that, and other things too, right? Like make sure there are enough unique characters, right? So you can't use A or 111111, right? You have to have at least X separate characters in your password. You can't just do 121212 or something like that, right?
Have you ever been in the position where you've had a user base and for whatever reason you've seen what their passwords are? Like, for the bank, I was actually employed there to do our own internal security audits. So I would have to do password dumps and then run cracks against them to see if I could compromise people's passwords.
I did that for my old shell provider.
Okay.
People have password like garden.
Yeah, I found that a lot of people had passwords that were like, something about their boss being a real dick. Like, I hate this place, or a lot of people had stuff like that in the business too. So sometimes you can do things like, I hate my boss, and if it's all just lowercase letters, it gets cracked in just no time flat.
Yep.
So yeah.
Well, especially when it's just straight MD5. And the other thing with straight MD5 is if 2 users happen to have the same password, they have the same hash, because that's how hashing works. And so that means that, of those 80,000 accounts they cracked, how many of them would just because it was the same password?
Yeah, because once you unlock it once.
Right. Whereas if they're cryptographically hashed, each one has a unique salt, means two people with the same password have completely separate hashes, and you have to crack them separately.
It's like we always say, Alan. Alan's not a doctor, but he always recommends you salt your passwords.
Yes.
Always. A little salt in the passwords is good for the diet.
Yeah. More salt is better.
Yeah. Alan's a big salt guy. All right.
Yeah.
So anything else on this story?
A little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, because of the weak caching, it was really easy for them to break the passwords. Even like some 10 and 11 character passwords were cracked very easily.
Oh, really?
Again, part of that was the fact that they're using a dictionary, so that reduces the key space. But yeah, it's just you need better hashes so that it takes people longer to try to break them.
Yeah, this is interesting. They have some numbers. They're actually, there's quite a few people that had 6-character passwords. There was 23,000 passwords that were 6-character and 21,000 8-character.
Those are the ones they managed to break. There
Yeah.
are some hashes that were 6 characters they didn't get because they're random enough. Right? This is just the ones they found in their dictionary.
Right.
From 5 hours of work.
Yeah.
This isn't, this isn't even a full-on attack. But the users of Stratfor, like we saw that client list before, there's a lot of organizations, institutions that are considered quite high security, right? Like defense departments and embassies and so on. And you'd really expect better password behavior. But a lot of the times, it's those organizations, institutions that have the problem, because you get executive level people that are like, oh, well, what's wrong with the password with a 1 at the end? Has a 1. It's so strong.
All we can do is do a show where we tell people to stop doing this and hope that the people in these businesses watch. I mean, I know we have a lot of corporate IT viewers, so maybe if we beat that drum enough, it'll sort of by osmosis get its way out into the community. You think? Is that being super optimistic?
A bit, but I just love that XKCD comic about the password, and it shows a really hard to remember password where it's a bunch of numbers and letters, and it shows how much entropy is in that and how hard it is to crack. And then it shows the password horse battery staple correct. Or something like that. Or correct horse battery staple.
Yeah, okay.
Correct horse battery staple. Which is a really long password that actually contains more entropy and is more random and harder to crack.
Okay.
Because of its length, but also because of just the fact that it's so many separate, distinct parts. So, it's not all about the randomness of your password. It's about having, like, you can have an easy to remember password that's still long and secure.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't have to be all random, although more random is better.
Before we move on, we should mention that you have a link in the show notes for the full report analysis that has so I was showing some of the visuals from that, like the common password characters and things like that. Great write-up. I love these reports.
Breakdowns of just how many different passwords based on the word password there are.
Yeah.
Right. That's why tools like John the Ripper, which is a hash cracking tool, it has this mode where it actually does common obfuscations on a password. So if you feed it a dictionary or whatever that happens to contain the word password, it'll do stuff like replacing the O with a 0, or replacing the S's with 5s, and trying all these different combinations, or doing things like just adding a 1 at the end.
Yeah.
And when you look at their password list of the most common ones, there's like 8 of the most common passwords contain the root word password in some obfuscated fashion.
Definitely.
And it's very disturbing that people still use the password ever.
I know. It's 2012, people.
It's like, it doesn't even make any sense. It's just, they need to be smacked.
I don't know if it's a lack of understanding or just people not caring. I've as a guy who's dealt with end users for, I'm coming on 15 years now. I still struggle to understand it to this day, Alan.
Yep.
Should we talk a little bit about some privacy and security concerns around AOL Instant Messenger?
Yes.
Which, I'll be honest, probably just because of the time that I was coming of internet age, and, well, I mean, this is sort of embarrassing, but you guys have to remember, this is like way long time ago, like on a little Mac Plus, where I had maybe a 96, but I believe it was a 14.4 baud modem, and I had like AOL 2.0, and since then I have had an AOL screen name, and I have logged in, even now that I've not used AOL for a million years, I still log into the AOL Instant Messenger service. So tell me what's going on here, Alan.
Yeah, interestingly, AOL was the last service that I added to my client. Because it was just like, when I started using it for support from my customers, it was just the only one I didn't have yet. Because I came to the internet a little bit later, mostly because I lived in such a rural area.
Right.
And so I started with ICQ.
Yeah. I remember when ICQ came around, and you had
that one was
long
that
numbers.
Stupid number.
Yes.
I had the number memorized for years. It's gone now, but I have a decently low number. It's not like yes. It's not like a 6. I think it's a 7-character number. I forget.
Dude, there were some elements to ICQ that are actually pretty bad arts. We should do like a retro tech episode one of these days and talk about something like that.
Pick up all that old stuff.
Yeah. All right. So tell me about the EFF's warning here.
The EFF is warning users that they shouldn't upgrade to the latest version of AOL Instant Messenger because of some changes AOL is making. The first is that as soon as you log in with the newer version, it sets a flag on your account in their database, opting you into logging all your conversations on the AOL server.
Oh, so not even on your local file system.
Well, yeah, so it turns on logging on your local file system, but it also authorizes AOL to log to their server without asking you. Now, AOL is touting this as a feature, saying now when you have on your computer and on your phone, by storing all your history on the AOL server, you can view that history no matter where you are.
Yeah, of course.
And
because that's so critical.
Yes. Now, Skype actually manages the same feature, except for it doesn't use the Skype servers.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, because Skype doesn't have centralized servers other than the login database.
I've wondered how this works, because you can still get messages even if you don't have like another Skype client running somewhere.
Right. With those ones, it's just the sender holds it and sends it to you later. But when you have multiple machines like I do, like I have this machine and a machine, my TV runs it and my phone runs it, they all have the history. And then when my phone logs in, it knows where it left off and it syncs the history with my other computers.
Right.
And it creates this whole file structure. And
isn't there a concern that if you run Skype for that long that you become like a supernode kind of a thing? Is that?
Yeah.
So if you have it running on your TV all the time, does that
I don't. My
degrade quality?
TV's off. My TV's off when I'm not watching it.
Oh, okay, right. And you don't.
So my TV has to catch up. So sometimes if it's been a couple days since I watched TV, which happens often,
all the time.
Sometimes, it takes about 5 minutes or 10 minutes for Skype of constantly popping up new windows showing all the conversation I had, and as it syncs them back up.
That really threw me off when I first started working with a team that really used Skype to collaborate, and I just had only used Skype for just basic calling. And I would start getting all these instant messages, and I thought, is this really happening right now? And like I would get like an entire group chat just dump in my chat. It really threw me off for a while.
For some of my friends that I play games with, we have a group chat that's been going for about 5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's just constant flood of messages. It's like sometimes while I'm working, I have to go and turn the notification for that window off just because I can't concentrate with the Skype sound going off every 10 seconds.
So that is...
4 other people are having some conversation.
That's really cool. So that's the flip side. That's if you didn't have... So what AOL is trying to do is probably something a little more elegant.
Right. Their solution is that they'll store all your history for you and sync it to your various devices.
Right.
Which is fine if you could opt into it. But they opt you in immediately without asking if you want to have everything you say on AOL recorded on their server.
I don't like that. And something tells me there's a footnote, too, that says they're allowed to parse it and that they own it if you sign up for, even when you agree to the UI.
Exactly. All kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the goal of that feature is to sync your history between devices, but it obviously has serious security and privacy implications, right? What if the AOL server gets broken into, like Stratfor just did? Somebody makes off with every log of every conversation you've had, right? But also there are legal implications, right? Those logs could be subpoenaed by law enforcement. Now, in that case, AOL would have the ability to tell you that they had been subpoenaed. However, if the government uses an instrument like a national security letter, then that actually prevents AOL from even telling you that your IM logs have been seized and that everything you say from now on is open to the government. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing. Yeah, anything that any company stores is then able to be requested in a court of law. Now the chat room's bringing up.
The interesting thing there is if you don't live in the States, for example, I live in Canada, but my logs would still be stored on the AOL server and could be subpoenaed by a foreign government.
I don't like that.
Now, especially if I don't use that anymore, but if I were using it for support for my customers or something to that effect, then there may be privileged data in there that has,
passwords or whatever.
Well, yes, but also just
competitive information.
There are laws in Canada about personal private information where you can't store the data outside the country. Certain data can't be transmitted outside of the country.
Oh, I didn't know. That makes sense.
And so because of that, if this is logged somewhere else, then it causes a problem.
The chat room's wondering how this affects third-party AIM clients, since it's a server-side thing. I would think.
Entirely sure. I think the messages still go through the server no matter what.
It seems like they'd be capturing them there at the server.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure. And also, apparently it doesn't. If you keep using the old version, it doesn't set the flag. So because Pigeon or whatever third-party client you'd use would still identify as the old version, it may do that so that it wouldn't be recorded yet. Now, AOL contends that they offer an off-the-record feature, but theirs doesn't work unless the other person is also using the newer version, which enables this logging. So in order to get away from the logging, you have to enable the logging and then opt out.
Well, so maybe if you do need the newer version, if you do need the newer version for logging to work, maybe third-party clients are fine then. Maybe they're not.
Well, affected. No, it's for both parties need the newer version for you to do the off the record, so it isn't logged.
Oh, I see. So it still logs if the person has an older version.
Well, I don't know if that's just because one person has the newer and one has the older. The newer one would log both sides,
right?
Or if it's logging everything. It's a little unclear.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, that's part of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, if you read over the whole post in the EFF's analysis, maybe it's a little more clear. The other important change they're making is the AOL client will now scan all chat sessions for any links that are pasted.
Yeah, this one really caught my
attention. And then it starts preloading those links. Now, their goal here is to find pictures and videos that you're linking to and have them buffered up and ready to go kind of thing.
But how does that work? Because it's not like they're loading your browser in the background. You know what I'm saying?
Depends, I guess, if you're using the AOL
If you're using the in-browser in the Messenger, which who in their right frickin' mind would use that? Nobody would use the web browser built into AOL's chat client. That's crazy.
I'm not entirely sure how it works. But it obviously has security issues, right? If there's ever an exploit or something for AIM, then I send you a link and it causes your browser to load it and get exploited right away, right?
Yeah.
There were problems with this way back years ago where MSN allowed you to, if you're using a non-MSN client, you could send HTML as part of a message, and it would be rendered as HTML on the other person's screen. So you could run malicious JavaScript on somebody else's computer by sending it to them as a message. Mm-hmm. That's been fixed, but it's just an example of the kind of oversights that can happen.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, and we've heard of Outlook, previewing emails and then executing code that's in the email. Yep. It's crazy.
But also those links that will obviously be logged, analyzed, and run by AOL could also contain private authentication information, right? Some URLs, especially like, as an example, your Google Calendar, there's a private URL you can get that gives somebody write access to it. And part of that URL is your authentication, right? It's a token for in place of a password.
Yeah.
And so you don't want AOL having that or logging that.
Right.
But also some links are one-time use links, like those activation links you get for a forum or unsubscribe links for various things. Now, if that gets prefetched by AOL, that would activate that. So if you paste a customer an unsubscribe link or something, it would unsubscribe them without them actually clicking on it.
I don't like that either.
Right? That's why prefetching in browsers was never a good idea either.
Well, I've also wondered, like, if somebody links to a podcast of ours and it goes out and prefetches it, and then somebody else links to a podcast, and it'd always be prefetching it from the same AOL server, so it would only show up to us as one download.
Possibly.
which would screw with our download counts, and I hate that. And like we have that happening right now with the Amazon Kindle Fire, and there's not like a ton of people using the Kindle Fire, so it's not a big deal. But you know, I get one download from the Amazon EC2 Silk browser service, regardless of how many Fire users there are. So it's kind of that's just not how the web is meant to work. You know, it kind of messes with some of the assumed underworking technology.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know, like that was my question when they were first talking about doing prefetching in browsers. It's like, well, I'm building this web app here, and I put a delete button in every row in a table, and if you prefetch that, that is going to totally screw everything up.
I hadn't thought of that either.
Right? Like, you know, maybe I put a confirmation there, and that solves that problem, but I shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to guess what the browser's behavior is going to be. It should be well defined. So the main problem is that once you've logged in with the newer version, it flags your account as enabling logging. So that would seem to suggest that even if you switch back to an older client, once your account has logging enabled, it's enabled. And also, IAMs are one of the most popular methods for spreading browser-borne infections, right? People link you stuff that is a virus or whatever, right? And then because people are more likely to click on something that is shared by a friend, and it just keeps spreading like that, you know? And things like that can really damage your credibility, right? Like, I always tease my friends when I get one from them. I'm like, I thought you were, you know, you thought you were a computer expert. What kind of noob are you sending me an MSN virus?
You know, have you ever been on AOL Instant Messenger where you've gotten just a random bot IMU with links and stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I have too. And probably because my account has been around for so long, but it actually got so bad for me that I had to turn off so that only people on my contact list can contact me now because of bots. And they always include a link with a URL in there. And the idea that thing's prefetching that creeps me out a little bit.
Exactly.
Any other thoughts on this story?
So the EFF kind of made up a list of some of the changes they'd like to see and gave it to AOL, and AOL has agreed to examine it and go over the recommendations and see if they can't improve it somewhat.
So, Alan, sometimes I just have to be honest with myself. I am not always the best enunciator. One of the downsides to living and breathing in my studio all the time is I just don't get out in the world. And every now and then, I feel like there's words that are invented just to make my life more challenging.
I don't think this is even a word. I have no idea where this comes from.
Here, I'm going to give it a shot. Lilup SQL injection attack. Right?
Possibly.
Lilup Pop. I don't know.
What do you pop, hill you pop is how I said it. But
LILUPOP HILUPOP.
Yeah, you pop, hill you pop. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
It's an SQL injection attack, and it's been spreading fairly rapidly. It was first identified by SANS, the security institution, and in early December, and they said there were a few thousand websites that were infected. But now it is spread to over 1 million websites.
Oh, okay.
And basically, the attack target sites that are based on the Microsoft IIS/ASP infrastructure and use MS SQL databases.
Okay.
Which is quite a few websites, although not as many major ones as you might think.
No, but I probably sound like a little bit of a broken record, but a lot of times prepackaged vendor solutions, because they're easy on the development end and so it keeps their costs down, are often based on IIS and Microsoft SQL. And the problem is these prepackaged vendor solutions are also often the lesser maintained systems because sometimes patches break compatibility and things like that. So they often tend to be a little bit lower hanging fruit. It's kind of a double whammy.
And also they're sometimes done as frameworks so that less able developers are able to churn out an application that they need.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly.
And so you get more amateur problems, kind of like you can see with some PHP code. Well, there's lots of very good PHP code. There's lots of very bad as well.
Exactly.
So the goal of this thing is basically by using SQL injection, they insert code that causes a link or a redirect to another site. So once your site is attacked with this SQL injection, all your visitors will be redirected to some other website.
Oh, burn.
Usually with the goal of selling them fake antivirus or other scareware.
Nice. So it's a double whammy.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Get them on the way in, get them on the way out.
We've seen similar attacks before where they've used, instead of injecting a redirect to a site to try to sell you something, they would instead inject code to take advantage of a Java or a Flash exploit and actually compromise your machine and install malware. Or, some other form of drive-by downloading and things like that.
Well, we saw last year, about midway through the year, when Bitcoin was really taking off, we started seeing people use little exploits to put miners on people's computers to just burn their CPU up and generate Bitcoins.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's funny with the amount of sophistication you can actually do just through some code on a website.
Right, and so in this one, basically, it's just injecting some code that causes the site to redirect and try to sell antivirus software.
Right.
Fake antivirus software.
Right.
Which the worst part is that people pay for this antivirus software and it either doesn't solve the problem or more likely makes it worse by installing even more malware.
Yeah, and I call it, and I think this is sort of what it's called now, is the scareware, right? Because it's the stuff that says you've been infected if you want to get cleaned up. And here, I'm pulling up a screenshot of it here because it looks like a genuine Microsoft product. In fact, they even use that little Microsoft Activate symbol that Microsoft uses for Windows to make it all look legit, and it kind of looks like Security Center. And it tells you you've got all of these viruses, and if you just want to remove them, you just click Remove All. Oh, and by the way, you need your credit card.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they got your credit card info.
Yeah.
It's pretty clever,
on top
really.
of the fact they're charging you, it's like these are shady people. You really don't want them to have your credit card in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And, they're the ones that got you messed up in the first place. So.
Yep.
All right, well, do you want to move on to the next story?
Sure.
This one probably brought a smile to your face, though you probably weren't all too surprised, were you?
Not that surprised. It's honestly faster than I was expecting. So,
am I pronouncing it right if I call it NGINX?
Yes.
NGINX has surpassed Microsoft's IIS as the #2 web server.
Yes. It's a big feat considering that it's only existed for a couple of years now.
Right. It is fairly new, isn't it? And this is the one. This is a large example of a large deployment of a BSD licensed software, right? Or because Apache is Apache licensed. Yeah. So this is another really big license getting to be a pretty key spot on the web.
Yes. So NGINX, which is a BSD licensed high-performance web server, has taken the #2 spot from Microsoft for hosting the most active websites according to Netcraft.
Oh, Web Server Smackdown 2012, dun dun dun.
So while IIS is used to host 84 million sites and NGINX only 56 million sites, when you consider active sites, both are around 22 million, with NGINX edging out by just less than 100,000.
So it's a close lead.
Yeah. Now, to determine active sites, Netcraft mostly, they look at the HTML structure of the page, the template rather than the text, and they create a fingerprint from that, particularly to detect parking pages, like that page that GoDaddy puts up if you don't have a website up yet.
Right.
Or all the ones you see from domain squatters that buy domains and then try to sell them for more money.
Or I was just actually Googling around for some domains, and there is a pretty common host out there who just has like this welcome to your first time page, and you can just sign up and start configuring it right away. I was blown away. Like, takes you to their cPanel and everything. If you had the username and password, you can just get right to work. But a lot of times you just see that it's just like they can park like thousands of these sites off of one server. Yeah.
And because of that, so Netcraft has found through its scanning of the internet about 582 million sites, but of those, only 175 million are active, meaning having a unique page on them.
Right. Okay. Otherwise, they're just parkers. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. So I linked to the Netcraft archive, and it has a couple of different graphs showing total inactive websites, total number for each web server, and active for each web server, and a couple other interesting statistics.
Right on, sir. Right on. Well, we've got a great feedback coming up and also an epic roundup where we follow up on several stories from previous weeks. Before we go on, we got to pay some bills and say holler to our good friends over at GoDaddy.com. Yes. Happy 2012 to GoDaddy. Now, we've got all kinds of deals that you can take advantage if you want to go get yourself a .com or something else. I, as a matter of fact, just picked myself up 2 new domains yesterday, and I used our code TechSNAP7 when I checked out to get domain names for $7.49. We also have TechSNAP10, which will save you 10% on any purchase, so you can just do whichever one works better for you, and also TechSNAP20 to get a great deal on hosting.
Or the other day, I used TechSNAP 40. I was renewing about 6 or so domain names, and I got good savings.
And we've also got that new code TechSNAP-X if you want to go get yourself a XXX domain. Now, maybe that's for your new business venture that you're going to make it big at, or maybe you're just trying to do a little brand protection, which is probably not a bad idea. You can use TechSNAP-X when you check out, and of course, you'll get 20% off that XXX domain when you do that. So thanks to GoDaddy for supporting TechSNAP, and happy 2012 to you. All right, Alan, well, that stuff out of the way. It's time to move on to the TechSNAP feedback. And welcome to the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. We try to cover a few of these, at least 2 or so in every episode. Sometimes, though, we feel like we can't get to all of them, but every now and then, we also have the opposite problem. We kind of had a dry spell for a little while, but we're actually, people are picking back up again, so that's good. And we have 2 this week. You ready, Alan?
Yes.
All right, so I'm a bit of a jerk on one of them. I didn't grab his name, and on this second, do you remember did you get the guy's name on the first one?
Yes.
I'm just a
jerk.
jerk.
It's been there somewhere, I think.
Yeah, it was like Chimako. Yeah, Chimakango. Chocamo. Chimako?
I have no idea.
All right, well, Chocolate Chili writes in, and he says, Alan, and this just totally fits in with our last news topic. Alan,
it does.
In your experience, how does NGINX, whatever, compare to Apache, whatever? What use cases would you recommend each for? In particular, I'm curious about performance with PHP. I know if you issue a command like php mydoc.php, it will parse the file. Isn't that essentially what NGINX... You're not going to correct me there? Okay.
No.
Okay. And Apache are doing behind the scenes? If so, then why would there be any performance difference? So I think what the core of his question is doesn't it really just come down to disk I/O and parsing a file? And if that's what it is, why is there any speed difference? Because it seems like it should be a hardware issue.
There's a little bit, and it's kind of in-depth to explain it all, but I'm going to try anyway.
Okay.
All right, so to start off, NGINX, which although it's spelled like it should be pronounced NGINX or something.
Yeah, it is one of those tricky ones. NGINX.
It's Russian, so you can excuse the way they use the letters differently.
Comrade.
Is fast and light and designed specifically to serve static content. So like JPEGs and HTML files and things like that, and it can serve them extremely quickly.
Okay.
Out of the box, though, it lacks the ability to do anything like interpretation, like CGI or PHP and things like that. But NGINX is also a great load balancer. It has the ability to handle requirements like sticky backends. So if you have to have sessions or something where once a user connects to the site, they need to hit the same backend all the time so that their session, because their session only exists on that machine, not on all of them.
Sure.
That's a useful feature. You can do last resort backends. So these are called backup backends where they're not used unless none of the other ones are available.
Okay.
And unfair load balancing. Right? A lot of load balancers only have the option to do fair load balancing.
I love that.
Split the load up evenly between all the things. Well, sometimes you have, this newer machine can handle more load, or this older machine can handle less, or whatever, right? So being able to do unfair load balancing is very handy. But the biggest difference with NGINX is that it's event-driven, rather than your typical worker style.
Okay.
So it uses a small number of single-threaded workers. Usually you set this to, n plus 1 or n minus 1, the number of processors you have, or cores, or threads, or whatever.
Sure.
And specifically what this allows it to do is to meet the C10K requirement, or having 10,000 concurrent clients connected to the web server, using only about 10 megabytes of RAM.
That's impressive.
Yes. It's basically something Apache just can't do, period.
No, I mean...
because Apache is architected
100,000 clients using 10 megs of RAM?
10,000 clients in 10 megs.
10,000 clients in 10 megs.
Yeah.
Okay. That's still really impressive.
That's all connected concurrently. They're all connected at the same time. That's a lot.
Because it's not a traditional worker type web server, it can do that.
Right. So it doesn't. It has, on our server we use like 8 threads, and the 10,000 connections are just spread between those, and they're serviced on an event basis.
Gotcha. So it's not one worker per connection.
Right. And that's the big difference. Apache is by far more powerful and versatile, and it has a couple of different NPM modes or multi-processing modules, but the most common one is pre-fork. And what that is Apache starts a bunch of separate workers.
Yeah, right.
So again, single-threaded, one process.
Okay, I'm following.
And then as if the load is high, and so say by default it starts 10 workers. Mm-hmm. If there are 10 people visiting the website, then the 11th person, there'd be no worker for them. So once there are too few spare workers, like say there's 8 of the 10 are busy, then it starts starting a couple more, so that there's always a minimum number of spare ones to handle those incoming connections. And then once it's done working, it can go back and hit one of the ones that's idle now. And so Apache also has a setting for the maximum number of idle workers, so that if you have a big load spike and it starts up a bunch of extra workers, if all of a sudden there's 20 workers sitting around not doing anything, it puts some of them back to sleep or shuts them down. The problem here is that each of those workers has to have all of the capabilities of the web server. Right, so that means each worker has to load PHP and WebDev if you have that, and all the other modules you have. So that means, with PHP and maybe Perl and some other stuff all put together in your web server, which is something you commonly see with, generic web servers like you would get from like DreamHost or GoDaddy and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, that means each of those threads can be quite big. Each worker can be, 18 or 20 megabytes or 100 megabytes. Depending on a bunch of different things. And so that means there's a limit to how many workers you can have running, because each one requires that chunk of RAM. And there's only some RAM
if you get lucky and get a lot of traffic from Hacker News one day, or Reddit, or Dig, if that still happens, then you kind of get screwed. And you see it happen all the time, where they call it the /dot effect and things like that.
Yes. For example, people were talking about, I think it's in a roundup story, is that file sharing is now a religion in Sweden. And they have a website for that, and right now it's a static HTML page with the big headline, "We got /dotted." And obviously their Apache server wasn't able to handle that.
Yeah, yeah.
And so basically, because each worker in Apache takes more memory than what NGINX would take to handle 10,000 clients, then it can't scale as well.
And it makes it obvious why you see NGINX gaining in popularity.
Yes. Now, NGINX has its own problems though, it lacks a lot of the features. But the problem with the Apache one is if you don't set the max clients properly, a lot of people set it too high, like 1,000 or something like that. It's like, well, even if you have 8 gigs of RAM, 1,000 Apache workers divided by 8 gigs of RAM would mean that you'd only have 8 megabytes for each worker. And you have to run the rest of the OS in there. You have to have your file system cached, and each worker is probably closer to 32 megabytes or more, not 8. And so then you end up in swap death, where the workers are constantly swapping in and out from the disk because there's not enough memory, and that causes each of them to get slower. And as they get slower, that means the request rate you used to be able to handle, you can't anymore, right? So if your machine is able to handle 120 requests per second, and then all of a sudden when you go to 130, there's not enough memory, all of a sudden it gets so slow that even once the load slackens off, you can't keep up with only 100 all of a sudden. It causes really weird load habits. And so you want to make sure that max client setting is on the low side rather than the high side of what you think is possible, because you don't want swap death.
Oh, yeah.
It gets to the point where like you can't even log into the machine to try to fix it.
That's a good tip.
And again, once it hits that max clients, it just means that the new client has to wait until some other worker isn't busy to get serviced. And now if it waits for too long, you can have it send a busy page or whatever. Which actually ties into our next question.
It does.
Get to that.
Does. Yeah.
The other thing with Apache is that the worker isn't free to start working on the next request once it finishes running the PHP code or whatever. It's not done yet. What it has to do is send that to the client and wait till the client has received it all. And then there's also keep alive. So keep alive, the concept here is that when you load a web page from a web server, there's usually more than one element to it, right? There's some CSS, some JavaScript, some images, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than opening one connection, getting the HTML, closing that connection, open a new one, get the first image, close it, open another one, get the next image, close it, right? You do keep alive, where up to like 3 or 5 seconds after you've downloaded the page, the connection's open and you can request a second file.
Right.
And that's faster because you don't have to do the whole setup of a new connection.
Right. All that negotiations is already done.
And it also doesn't put you at the back of the line if there is a queue.
Aha, yeah.
But that means that if you don't load any additional files, that's 5 seconds that worker could have been working on something else, and it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, if you have a slow connection, then the server has to wait while you finish downloading that file, and that worker's tied up that whole time.
Yeah. That particular point right there was one of the very first issues that Jupiter Broadcasting ran into as we started to grow. And when I first started, I didn't know really much about serving up large media files. Mm-hmm. And, back then MP3 files were large media files. And so people would come to our website and I would just host them within the website's web directory. And what would happen is on release day of the Linux Action Show, our web servers, workers would be completely tied up serving those MP3 files for a long, long time, and our website would become unresponsive.
Yep.
Been there. Struggled with that.
Yeah. And so NGINX, however, is incapable of dealing with some things like PHP. But doesn't mean it can't do it. NGINX is designed as a reverse proxy. So it would sit as your front-facing web server and then deal with stuff internally. So what it can do is pass off requests that it can't handle to an appropriate server that can handle them.
Okay.
So the two major options here are fast CGI and another web server, like Apache. So if you use fast CGI, that works a lot like the Apache mechanism we just described with all the workers, except the workers aren't the whole web server. They're just the one thing. So, for example, at Scale Engine, we use fast CGI, and so we have a bunch of PHP processes sitting there running, but not doing anything, right?
Oh, okay.
And then the web server connects to them and sends them the PHP script. They run it and send the result back.
And they hand it back.
Yeah.
Ah.
Now, the first thing here is that comparing that to the Apache setup, when you load an image in Apache, you have PHP code loaded in RAM and sitting there, but it doesn't get used because you're just serving an image. But that worker is tied up sending that image or that MP3 file or whatever.
Yeah. Right.
With this setup, NGINX takes care of all the static files like your MP3s and your images, and the PHP workers only get called when it's a PHP file.
So we're only worried about code execution.
Yeah, so they're only dealing with their specific area of responsibility. So you're not wasting your RAM on a PHP process.
Are you able to take that to a next step forward then? Are you able to run those PHP workers as a separate user with separate security permissions?
Yes.
That's nice. So that kind of increases...
Scale Engine, we run separate pools for each customer.
Really?
We also run multiple machines.
So Jupiter Broadcasting's PHP, if something went haywire, wouldn't necessarily...
It actually runs as a user named php-jbcasting.
That's awesome. See, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
Because now you see, and we should back up. I just want to mention this. People have asked what some of the fundamental differences between a Windows server and a Unix server. That is a scenario of something that would be much more challenging under Windows. Not impossible, but to really do it like that, that's really slick. Mm-hmm. That's something that just the inherent permissions model of Unix just makes much more readily available.
And yes, somebody's pointing out, yes, you can do Apache with fast CGI as well. Again, still, the Apache worker to serve just static files is overkill. But to do more generalized stuff, Apache does have some advantages. So the other option with NGINX is to proxy to another web server. So a common setup is actually to put NGINX in front of Apache. Right? So you make Apache listen on localhost and put NGINX listening on the actual IP.
Yeah.
The connection comes in. NGINX can serve static files, possibly, or maybe not, and then proxy everything else to Apache.
Even though Apache is running on the same box.
Yeah. And so what can happen there is it's either over localhost or a LAN, which are both very fast. But it means that when that request for a PHP script hits Apache, Apache runs the PHP, generates the response, and sends it to NGINX. NGINX can download that really quickly over the LAN or localhost, and then it closes the connection, and that worker is ready to do the next thing. The Apache worker is free, even though the user hasn't received the response yet.
That's sweet.
And then NGINX because NGINX can handle 10,000 users without breaking a sweat, it can slowly send that file to that user in the meantime. So it actually allows you to make your Apache server more efficient.
So it's keeping Apache more freed up. It's keeping the PHP workers more freed up.
It's actually keeping Apache more busy. It's making Apache not waste its time.
Yeah, I guess that's a better, it's managing Apache
the wait
better.
cycle.
Right.
So it allows you to get more efficiency out of the same hardware.
Right. God, that's slick.
Yeah, so when I first started building my first high-load website I hosted was hackintosh.org. And originally it started out as an Apache server, and then it was 3 Apache servers. And then we put NGINX in front, and it got a lot better. But it still wasn't perfect. And eventually they moved to the Scale Engine platform once we invented that, and it was...
I have lurked for a long time at hackintosh.org because our recorder we're using right now runs off of Hackintosh. So that's a useful little site there.
But there are a couple of shortcomings with NGINX,
yeah?
especially if you're going to be hosting a lot of stuff for customers.
But that's what you do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but my customers are specialty customers. I'm talking more generalized stuff.
Okay.
For security and performance reasons, NGINX doesn't have .htaccess files.
Oh, okay.
Right. That's one thing that Apache does, and a lot of sites rely on that, like WordPress and so on.
WordPress does, yeah.
Now, so with NGINX, the configuration is done in the config file.
So you can do like essentially htaccess style stuff, but you just do it in one conf file?
Yeah. Well,
I kind of would almost prefer that, actually.
Well, that's originally how Apache was, but if you have to delegate stuff like that to your customers,
right,
you can't really do that with NGINX.
Right, of course.
So we have a bunch of templates, but if the customers want some new rewrite rule, we kind of have to make it for them, which is slightly painful. The other thing is that the rewrite rules are different, right? They don't look like mod rewrite rules. They actually look like C. They're if statements. Actually, they look more like Perl, but
okay.
They're regular expression if statements.
But so they have a higher learning curve than a simple htaccess file does.
Yeah. And now a lot of apps like WordPress and Drupal and so on now come with configurations for NGINX, or examples anyway, rather than just the example htaccess file. So it's fairly easy to set them up now. But it's just if you're doing some stuff like that, it's not always easy with NGINX. NGINX is more about hyper tuning your website to be as fast as possible, whereas Apache is about doing lots of different things all at once, out of the box as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
So while both servers are very useful, if you need versatility and a very generalized solution, and you need ease of use, and you have to support a lot of clients, Apache is likely the better solution. If you're doing a really busy site and you need to get the most out of your hardware, NGINX is probably the right solution.
And it's interesting, right? I mean, we're seeing that as it's taking the number 2 slot.
Yeah. So, the other thing is NGINX, there's no control panels for NGINX, right? Like there's no cPanel or DirectAdmin or anything like that for NGINX.
Do you think that's just because of its age?
Partly, but also because of the way it's configured. It's not very conducive to that.
Okay.
Because all the configuration is done in kind of like a programming language type style with if statements and such.
I see. I follow. Interesting.
Somebody asked how IIS compares badly.
Ouch. He says, Crash Benedict says, honestly, Alan. And Alan was quite honest.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on that question? Or are you ready for the next one?
No, that's about it. There was something. He's always just asking about the performance difference running the PHP code. In the end, it's all pretty much the same. For how fast it executes the code. It's just with Apache, if you're doing the code is running inside the web server, then there's the overhead of the web server and PHP. Where if you do something like fast CGI, it's basically the same as running the PHP code at the command line, except for PHP is running and listening on a port, and you send it the PHP file and it runs it.
And there's a security advantage to it being isolated and separated like that too.
Yes, there is.
So you get performance and security, and that's always a win-win. All right, well then, go ahead.
If you use a something in PHP like APC or the alternative PHP cache, you can compile the PHP script and keep that in shared memory and reuse it instead of having to compile it every time it starts.
We should say too that we have a live chat room over at jblive.tv that we do on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. And Alan, which is what, 3 p.m. where you're at?
4 p.m.
4 p.m. where you're at? Oh, yeah. 4 p.m. over on the East Coast. And that's jblive.tv if you'd like to join us in the show. All right, are you ready for the next question, sir?
Yep.
Now, I have to apologize. I didn't grab his name, but it just fit in so well with this first question that I wanted to grab it in here. But he writes us from South Africa, which is awesome. And he says, first of all, I love the show. I watch it religiously every Friday, which is awesome. I was wondering if you guys could start a series where you answer some common questions we developers, system admins have. That's an interesting idea. He gave an example. Things like how do overloaded server pages work? Like, for example, Twitter's fail whale. How can an overloaded server still serve a page that says it's overloaded?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Alan, you want to take that one?
So, we love to answer common sysadmin questions. That's actually basically the point of TechSNAP. So we don't need a separate show for that necessarily.
But, we always take suggestions. If you have a question,
then send it in to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, and we'll try to keep throwing knowledge at you.
Yeah.
Developer questions are a bit more complicated because neither Chris or I are really a developer. But if it's more of a developer ops question about, deploying it and how it works and runs, that's kind of our area actually. So, and send it anyway. And the worst we can do is ignore it.
Yeah. That's true.
And we try not to do that.
And if nothing else, we get a sense that that's topics people want covered, and then we can try to figure that out too. So.
And yes, that maybe leads to the new show or whatever.
Yeah.
So server busy pages. Such as the fail whale. Those are usually static, right? It's an HTML page, and there's no processing involved, right? Whereas rendering a page on Twitter means querying their database, finding all the latest tweets, and this and that and the other thing, and that takes a bunch of time and a bunch of processor power.
Yeah,
and
it's got to pull in your whole timeline and all that stuff,
and then cross-reference that with who you're following and who's following you and all that stuff,
and pull theirs in.
Right. Whereas the static page literally requires almost no resources at all to return to a user.
Another example is like, I keep showing the Homer Simpson fail wheel. Another example is Google Plus pages are completely rendered at the time of display. In fact, if you look at the source code if you go view source on a Google Plus page, it is one of the most horrendous things you'll ever see. It is just a block of non-human readable code that machines generate, and if you think about the overhead that takes to compile that page together every single time, if something's wrong, it's much easier just to serve a static HTML, sorry, something's broken page. Yeah.
And so, for example, if you use a server like NGINX, you could serve thousands of requests a second for that fail whale page from a little underpowered laptop. Right? It doesn't require much in the way of resources.
And something else people will do is maybe they'll have like a standby instance on EC2 or like a GoDaddy host, which is super cheap to have, and it's really easy just to flip DNS over to like if you're going to be down for a little while to a standby machine, and they can often host it from somewhere else.
Yeah. Also, if the site is big enough to have an overloaded page, they probably have many servers. And so what they'll have is either a web server or load balancer, like NGINX or something, that sits in front of their backend.
Sure.
And the backend is where the application runs, where the PHP or whatever code runs. And so the front-end servers will try to find a backend that's working, and if they can't find one, then they return that static overloaded page. For example, also the web caching program Varnish, which Scale Engine also uses, it was originally designed for newspapers, and it actually has the ability where you like embed an error page into the configuration. So if it can't contact a backend to get the page the user's requesting, it can just return that from memory without even having to touch a disk or anything.
That's true, because it would store that in RAM.
It's funny because Steam was throwing an error from Varnish the other day, but they had never configured the error page, so it was just like blah 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 guru meditation.
Yes,
Varnish.
I love when you see that and you're like, oh, guys forgot to change the defaults.
Yeah, and I've seen the same thing at Slashdot as well.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. Well, thanks, everybody, for emailing in your questions. And I also responded to a few that we didn't make into this week's show, and including some that I thought maybe we might work in a later date. And I just said, hey, hold on. But, yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on that?
No. Thanks.
Okay, man. Well, you know what that means. It's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make into the main news section of the show. Generally, we'll have links for you to go follow up and read more on. And they're almost always powered by our awesome TechSNAP Reddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Thank you to everyone who's over there voting stuff up, submitting stories. I visit that place multiple times a day, and I love it. Again, links.techsnap.tv for our awesome subreddit. Okay. Now, the first couple stories that I think we'll throw in the roundup are just real quick, kind of like, oh, geez, oh, boy, what's going on? The first one, kind of a funny one, and I'm sure it won't be an issue for a long time, but Firefox has actually gotten to the point where it's so, we'll go with feature-rich, that its code is actually failing to compile on 32-bit operating systems because they cannot supply the compiler with enough memory. And so, really, all that really means is that the build machines need to be swapped out to 64-bit because they can still compile the 32-bit version on them. But Mozilla's temporary fix in order to keep shipping new releases of Firefox is to remove features from Firefox. Wow. But hey, you know what?
I'm pretty sure we covered a story a little while ago that Android has the same problem.
Oh, I didn't remember that.
I'm pretty sure that compiling Ice Cream Sandwich for Android requires like 8 gigs of RAM or something.
Oh, yeah, something nuts, right.
Something really extreme.
Yeah. One other one, just to warn you about, I haven't really heard a lot about this yet, but it seems like a lot of people are confirming it. Crucial M4 SSD drives. There's supposedly a bug that I'm not sure if Crucial's fully confirmed yet, but it's sounding pretty sure. That after 5,200 hours of continuous operation, once you hit 5,200 hours, 1 hour after that, you start to have failures on the SSD. And I guess a lot of people are having that.
Apparently, it's like even once you power it off and you power it back on, it works for an hour, and then it dies again. Yeah. And it now that's suspiciously close to the overflow time for the smart counter for the number of power on hours. So in the smart counter in the hard drive, it counts how long it's been on, and that rolls over like every 48 days or so. And I think that number works out to somewhere around 5,200 hours. So if there's a problem with the way they handle the overflow, every time an hour goes by and it tries to tick that number up by 1 and it fails, the firmware on the drive crashes.
Now, they're saying that Intel drives aren't affected by this, but other drives, like some Kingston drives that use the a couple of SandForce controller chipsets, which is a lot of SSDs.
Including some OCZ drives like the ones you and I have.
Yep. Man, that's running in this machine right now. I hope SSD can get over these early bumps. All right, let's move on to sort of a story that might be worth paying attention to because it could be mirrored here in the United States in about a year and then around the world. And that is Spain, unfortunately, just recently passed a law that's essentially a SOPA-style privacy law. And unfortunately...
well, not quite. You're missing the point of the story.
Oh, no, I'm not done yet.
Okay.
The part that I want to bring up is that they were pressured by I think this came out in I don't know if it was a wiki leak or do you know how they leaked this? Supposedly
I'm not entirely sure.
Huh?
But yeah, I'm not entirely sure how it came out. But
supposedly
the point is that the Spanish government hasn't passed the SOPA style law, but the U.S. government is threatening them and trying to force them to do so.
And here's the thing that's interesting about it, though, and this is where I think there could be a parallel in the U.S., is Spain tried to do this a year ago and got so much backlash over it that they tabled it. And then now it's up again. Now they're bringing it up again. And I think they're passing it, actually.
Well, it seems that, the problem is they're about to have an election, and the government that's going out doesn't want to be the government with the SOPA sticker on them. So they've been trying to delay it until after the election. But the U.S. government keeps pressuring them, saying that you need to do it now.
Yeah, the U.S. ambassador to Spain actually threatened to put them on a special 301 report priority watch list of countries the U.S. thinks is not doing enough to protect intellectual property, and which can lead to embargo.
Yeah.
Which is insane.
Obviously not going to do that to Spain, but it's a bullying tactic.
Yeah.
And the U.S. has done the same thing to Canada. As part of the WikiLeaks, we saw that they've been doing this since the introduction of the DMCA many years ago, that they've been trying to force Canada to have similar legislation. Luckily, so far, every attempt to make such has failed. But, it just The U.S. is literally out there threatening other governments, trying to get them to pass SOPA-style legislation. And again, we see that SOPA isn't written to protect anyone other than the lobbyists and the movie companies that pay them.
And unfortunately, it's going to be, the lockstep support for the copyright big media companies like the RIA and the MPAA. That lockstep association with them, I think, will go on to be one of the legacies of Obama's administration. Unfortunately, it's their expansion
like
of
any
power.
Government before has ever fought against it.
Yeah, I know. It just seems like it's really stepped up, and I have my theories on that. I wanted to also just use one quick moment in the roundup to tell people that it is the start of 2012. You can take 2 minutes and go over to mypermissions.org, and this site will connect to like Facebook or Twitter or Google or Dropbox, and it analyzes what permissions you've given to other applications to those services. And that's just I think you'd be amazed at how many things over time get authorized to your different accounts. And this sort of goes through and does an audit of them, and it seems like at the start of the year it's a good time to do that. So I tossed a link for that in the roundup. All right, Alan. This first real meat story here in the roundup is about a WordPress bug. And, of course, Jupiter Broadcasting is a WordPress site. Tell me what's going on here.
Yeah, so there's a cross-site scripting flaw that's found in WordPress where basically a certain server variable is printed back out into the output without being escaped properly. Which would allow someone by visiting the site with an obfuscated URL to cause that string to be printed in the page, which could be some JavaScript to make an alert pop up or something, or redirect the page, or a bunch of different things. Now, the way the bug works, it only works if your WordPress install is done for an IP address rather than a hostname.
Oh, okay.
And since that is a relatively small number, but not still a significant number of sites, it's not that big of a deal. But it just shows that these flaws are still there in WordPress, and that people still haven't learned that every bit of output needs to be escaped properly.
All right, an interesting story next in the roundup that goes back to an original story we've been following since one of the early podcasts of TechSNAP. Stuxnet has been almost become legend now. I was going to say mythology, but legend. Analysis done on Stuxnet sort of backs up the suggestion that it has links to Dooku and other malware. This is just continuing to evolve. Alan, what's going on?
But also that by analyzing it and looking at the way that they actually do the rootkit part of it with the driver, it suggests that Stuxnet and Dooku are a lot older than we thought, going back as far as 2007.
Based on the fact that they're using old exploits or something?
Well, it's that the way the driver is built is the same as one that's been seen before. So basically, they're an evolution of a technique that started back in 2007, and there's a nice infographic there.
Yeah, there is.
It kind of shows how the lineage, the family tree of Stuxnet and Dooku and so forth. But also that this is evidence suggests that there are more variants of Stuxnet and Dooku that we've just never seen. Now, that may be that they were just specifically targeted against a very small number of targets, and they were just never caught in the wild, or that maybe they just were never used or kept secret.
Somebody's holding them still.
Yeah, or more
planning to unleash it onto the world.
Stuxnet was kind of specifically targeted at that one facility. So there may be other ones that were targeted at other facilities that were maybe successful or maybe not, and it was just kept secret because it's embarrassing to have your stuff hacked into and destroyed or whatever.
Well, and if you're doing it for fun, you release everything you got, maybe.
Yeah.
And if you're holding it for some sort of corporate advantage or state advantage,
right,
you wouldn't want to spoil it.
Exactly. If you got in there and stole some data, then you can have the Dooku or the derivative replace itself or erase itself and get out clean, and no one ever knows you were there, and you got away with the data you were looking for.
Exactly.
And that seems to be kind of the genesis of Stuxnet and Dooku, is just that highly targeted at specific targets, rather than a lot of viruses we see are very generic, designed to try to hit as many people as possible, whereas these are designed to, gather intelligence and reconnaissance and figure out how all the different parts and steps to break into somewhere and get really high value information.
Right. You want to do a follow-up to, I think it was like the first story we covered last week about the New York Times?
Yes, it was a breaking story last week. That New York Times email blast, they've come out and said that, yes, it was an accidental miscue. Basically, it was meant to send to 300 customers and instead went to all 8 million.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Now, originally we had seen that on their Twitter account, they had denied that the email was from them. But, that's just whoever runs their Twitter account saw a bunch of people being like, hey, why am I getting this email when I don't subscribe? And just said, well, that's obviously not from us. But as we talked about in the episode, when we looked at the headers, it was a validly signed domain keys email. So it was at least semi-legitimate. But because they were using an email provider that had been hacked before, and just because of the number of people that were receiving this, there was a possibility that it was compromised, but it turns out it wasn't. It was just sending out 8 million more emails than it meant to.
So a little bit of egg on their face. We got another follow-up.
It's just a reminder to people that, don't claim things that like that wasn't me or that wasn't us until you're sure. Be like, we don't think that was us, and we're investigating at least.
It's a little bit of large company-itis too. Sometimes the left hand, right hand kind of thing happens there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So follow up to the WPS story we covered last week. There's actually been like a proof of concept utility release now, hasn't there?
Well, it's a little more than that. It's actually like a usable tool.
Right. So it's not so much a proof of concept. It's more like it's usable concept.
An exploit.
I guess. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I've seen some screenshots of it. It looks kind of like it's not too hard to use either.
Yeah, and that's the idea. So if you don't remember, the WPS thing is a Wi-Fi protected setup. The idea is that it allows you to it's an easy system for end users to enable high security on their Wi-Fi by using an 8-digit PIN number instead of having to remember a really long password or whatever.
Right.
But the problem is that in the way that it returns the failed login messages from the router, you can tell whether or not the first 4 of the 8 digits are correct.
Right.
And by doing that, after a couple of tries, you can basically cut the number of possible keys down from 100 million to 11,000. And then fairly easily try each of those and figure out what the PIN is, and then gain access to that router.
So we went from last week to, boy, this looks like it might not be too hard to pull off, to in 1 week's time span, here's the tool you download to just do it.
Yeah.
So that's fast.
Have fun. Go break into a bunch of people's wirelesses that use WPS.
Wow. Okay. Well, and if you want more details on that story, you can listen to TechSNAP 38, where we go into detail. Alan, I think we're coming to the end of this week's episode.
Yes, that's all I got.
All right. Well, like I mentioned, you can listen or actually you can watch too. We have various different formats for mobile devices, audio only for you commuters over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And if you want to subscribe to an RSS feed, all you got to do is find any post of TechSNAP and scroll down, and there will be RSS feed links right there, pretty much any flavor you want. And if you're an iTunes subscriber, we do appreciate if people go in and make comments and rate us in iTunes, because that's sort of, while I'm not the biggest iTunes fan, it is a great way for people to find the show that are browsing TechSNAP or browsing iTunes for podcasts, which is a lot of people. So we appreciate all of the help people give us there. Hey, it's the start of the new year, so why not go in there and put something in there? All right, everyone. Well, TechSNAP comes out every single Friday over at jupiterbroadcasting.com, and we appreciate you watching this week's episode. We'll see you right back here next week.